on the Windrush, on the Empire Windrush, and he's got some very interesting records. So if it's okay to do that, because Levi's like me here in Australia in late in the evening, so that will work out okay. So I think we'll start our recording then. And Simon, that's great. Thank you very much again for Belong Nottingham for hosting this meeting. And thank you as well for David Alston, Highlands and Scotland, who was part of the team that got all this going, and myself and my colleague Caroline Sansom from Learning Links International. And we're initiating this, and it's good to see Chris Campbell here from the South Wales Jamaica Society. Caroline and I are also members of the North Wales Jamaica Society, so those of you in North Wales who want to know what that's all about, we'll let you know at some stage. But Levi, so can we have a conversation then?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah,
Indeed.
okay. Are you going to put your camera on, or are you going to be
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
incognito?
Hang on. I'm just trying to get that organized, actually.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's really such a coincidence that we're talking with Levi here, because I met Levi when I was living in Melbourne City with my daughter, and Levi had some responsibilities to deliver things, and made sure that we got what we wanted. And I recognised his interesting accent, because it sounded as if he
That's
came
it.
from Birmingham like me.
Yeah.
So so I said, "Oh, where'd you come from then?" And he said, "Oh, from the UK." I said, "And where in the UK, Levi?" I said, putting on my Birmingham Wolverhampton accent, and he said, "Oh, I come from Birmingham. My mum lives in Birmingham." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting," and talking about one or two things. And then somehow, Levi, and I don't know how this happened, we got round to this conversation about the sort of things I was interested in. And
Oh, yeah.
we
Thank
talked
you.
about your
Thank you. Good
dad,
night.
and your dad uh, travelled over to the UK on the Empire Windrush.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
and what's really special about this is that it appears that your dad was called Neil. Was your dad Neil?
Now, his name was Daniel.
Sorry.
Um, Neil is my younger brother.
Right.
Um, so I was just going to say a little bit about my father's interview.
Yes,
Um,
please do, because that was so fascinating that Levi said his father had
yeah,
been interviewed by the BBC, and we
yeah,
don't know whether this has ever been broadcast, but we're looking at ways to be able to share it. And also, your brother Neil
yeah.
lives in near
In,
Newtown
that's
in
right, in Wales.
mid Wales.
Yeah.
So, have you been in touch with him?
Yes, I have. Yes. So
Good, good.
he's isolating at the moment, like everybody else, I guess. So,
Okay,
um,
well,
but um, but just
maybe we
look.
can.
So my father was interviewed by the BBC. I think it was sometime in the late 90s, and the interview was recorded. And when my father came out to visit me in Australia, which was his only visit, and that was in 2000, he actually gave me a copy of the interview. And I didn't actually listen to it at the time while he was there for some reason. It was actually after he left I'd actually listened to it. And I guess I sort of realized the importance of the interview. So when I left the UK, which was back in 1989, um, I don't recall knowing much about the Windrush at all, and I certainly don't recall any reference to the Windrush generation, which I guess subsequently developed after my departure in '89. But anyway, when I first heard the interview, which, as I said, was sometime after my father's visit to Australia, I guess I realised that. It was actually quite an interesting document because it was a lot of information there that I wasn't aware of, things that my father never discussed at home, just about the journey from Jamaica, his settlement in the UK, and a whole range of issues that he sort of experienced at the time. Um, he also talked about his motivation for leaving the West Indies. And I suppose my sort of impression was that most people left for economic reasons to better themselves in the UK. But certainly, according to what my father had to say in the interview, he left. I think it was basically to do with the fact that he was educated in the British system. And I guess, like a lot of people living in the colonies, Britain was seen as the centre of things. And he always aspired to travel to the UK. He seemed to have great appreciation of British culture and history. And that's something that he wanted to experience. So I think he saw himself as a young man who wanted to embark on this sort of journey. He saw himself as a bit of a pioneer, and he saw it as a bit of an adventure to travel to the UK. So, he talks about, as I said, some other reasons as well. As I said, it was just to sort of get away from Jamaica, as I said, and to try something different, as I said. And the UK was seen as a natural place. And it's interesting because a lot of Australians I've spoken to travel to the UK as well. So I think it's a similar experience to other people in the colonies who saw the UK, London, as the place to sort of travel to. And I think that was part of his motivation for traveling. And so he was able to, I guess, come up with the funds for the passage. And I think his brother, according to my mother anyway, it was actually his brother who actually helped him with the passage to pay for the fare. And so he was able to acquire a ticket and was there on the boat. So he also, in the interview, also, I guess he talks about the journey across from Jamaica. He talks about who was on the boat, predominantly males. He said there were very few women on the journey. He talked about where the boat stopped. So I think the first place they traveled to was Mexico. Then they went on to Cuba, which was all new to him, and then on to Bermuda. And then I believe it was from Bermuda they sailed on to Tilbury. So he also talks about his arrival there in Tilbury, what it was like. Very cold. I guess that's a common experience with most traveling from the West Indies for the first time. They're struck by the cold weather. That was a greeting in the UK. And he said that particular, I think he arrived in June, so it was actually summertime, but it was a particularly cold summer, probably a bit like the one we're experiencing now in Melbourne at the moment. So that was the sort of greeting. So, I mean, he also talks about other things about his some of the attitudes that he encountered when he arrived in the UK. I think that because he'd studied so much of British history and he saw himself as British, I think that he was expecting to sort of fit nicely into the UK, that it would be straightforward because, you know, we spoke English. He didn't speak much Patois himself, although my mother tended to. She speaks with more of a heavy Jamaican patois, but my father spoke with a sort of a cultivated accent. So I think he was expecting to be received and quite easily in the UK, but that wasn't the case at all. So, he doesn't talk. It's interesting that my father doesn't use the word racism. He tends to refer to prejudice. That I guess he encountered a fair bit of prejudice, and he was quite surprised by that because he thought that because he knew so much about the British history, he thought that the people in England knew a lot about the West Indies as well, and he was quite surprised at how little they knew about the West Indies, and were quite ignorant too about black people. So I think he was quite surprised by that. He also talked about meeting people who were quite sort of open and liberal. So he talks about meeting middle class people. He thought that they were a lot more sort of open than some of the working class people he encountered at work, who he thought were quite, as I said, ignorant. But he does give a number of anecdotes about one of his anecdotes is he was out in the park somewhere, and an Englishman came up to, I think he was with a couple of other friends, and this Englishman was quite curious, having not seen black people before, and they struck up a conversation, and he was invited back to their place, back to this guy's place, which I think he mentions was somewhere in Smethwick. And so my father and his friends took up the invitation, and they were quite excited to go back and to spend some time in the home of an English person. And on the way there, they got a bit lost and needed some direction. So my father approached the woman and said, excuse me. And as soon as he spoke, she ran away. So this is sort of late 1940s. And he said, and in the interview, he talks about just running and running and running and just running, and he was just really surprised by that, because he'd never sort of encountered that before. And as I said, he saw himself as being British, so he was quite surprised by that. He also goes on to talk about some of the difficulties in acquiring housing as well. He said that was quite difficult. He said although people would be quite friendly towards him, quite often when it came to offering work or housing, then that was another story. So that's where he encountered some difficulties. And often the work that was available, he thought was, I guess my father thought it was a bit below him, it was unskilled work. And I guess because he received more education back in Jamaica than most at that time, he thought that he should be doing more skilled type of work. He was more capable of doing skilled work, but often that wasn't offered to him. And often when there were job vacancies, he was often, he would ring up and would be told, put on his best British accent, and was told that, yes, the job is available. And then he'd turn up, and then suddenly he'd be told, the job's no longer available. So yeah, it's quite a sort of comprehensive account, the interview. I do have a transcript of the interview too, which I can make available, but I think it is a useful sort of historical document, because as I said, apart from his initial experiences, he talks about what life was like for him in the UK. He talks about, his marriage to my mother. He talks about the children. The church played a very important role for my father as well. He talks about his aspirations. He wanted to become a teacher, and actually attended Handsworth Technical College.
Oh.
Yes, actually talks about that.
I taught there.
Yeah, he talks about the Handsworth Technical College. And then he decided that because Britain was very much a place of manufacturing and an industry, that perhaps he should become an engineer instead. So we decided to enroll in an engineering course. But then he talks about, all the children coming along. So there were 7 of us all together. And so he wasn't really able to finish his studies. So, because the priority became the family, I guess, at that time. So that didn't take off for him. So, but I think the church played a big role for my father, because I think my father was like an elder at the church, and I think that gave him a bit of a leadership role, which I think he felt he was more cut out with his education for more sort of leaderships, and I think the church provided that opportunity for him. So, but yes, so that's just a quick overview of the interview, but there are some things, as I said, that I wasn't really I wasn't before listening to the interview. I wasn't aware of his reasons for traveling to the UK. I mean, I had some idea about some of the experiences he'd encountered, although in the interview, he did say that he didn't really want to talk to us, that's myself and my brothers and sisters, about some of the difficulties he encountered, because he didn't want to prejudice us against the English. He wanted us to settle into to England and become English. And so often a lot of the difficulties he experienced, he didn't really share that with us, but he does talk about that in the interview. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, Levi. And
Yeah.
one of the things that yes, round of applause there. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for summarising. What is really a long interview.
Yeah.
Takes about 45 minutes or more, isn't it?
Yes, that's actually,
And it,
yeah, a bit more than that. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not edited.
Yeah.
Whether it was actually broadcast by the BBC or not, I don't know. Do you know?
I'm not sure because I
No. Yeah.
wasn't there in the UK at the time,
No.
so I'm
No.
not sure.
No.
Yeah, but yeah,
Um, what fascinated me when I first heard it was that the interview took place around the 1980s, I think,
I think it
uh,
was 90s. Yeah,
or
sometime in the 90s.
1980s,
Yeah,
1990s.
yeah, yeah,
So, as,
bit,
as you say, some of the things that now we talk about racism, we talk about Windrush, the Windrush
yeah,
generation, he's
yeah.
not talking in those terms at
No, he
all. He's
doesn't know.
talking
No,
in that way.
no.
And I think the way you just described that he didn't
Yeah,
share with you because he wanted you to settle in.
yeah,
And some of the other comments he makes really interesting. So what we'll try and do is make,
yeah,
if it's okay with you, make the interview available for people to listen to through our
yeah,
website.
yeah, yeah.
So
That's fine.
we'll
Yeah,
work on that and get
yeah,
that because it is quite fascinating.
yeah,
And we have several themes that are going on through our Black History lunchtime conversation sessions. And
yeah,
Windrush, the story of the Windrush generation, is very much one of those stories. And
yeah,
we've had Yasser Safari with us before now, doing
yeah,
some poetry, and the national poet of Wales, Ifor
yeah,
ap Glyn, presented his poem on um, his response to Windrush. So that was
yeah.
was interesting too. So thank you. So questions from anybody else or comments from others? Tony, have you got anything that you'd want to add? I don't know.
Yeah, yes, thanks for that experience, Levi. That was, I found that very, very informative. As a someone who's very interested in history,
Yeah.
um, I would have loved to have had that audio. Is it an audio you said of the
Yeah, it's
father?
an audio. It's an audio interview. Yeah, yeah,
I would have
um,
loved to have
yeah,
had that because last semester, one of the topics that I was teaching on my course at the university
yeah,
here was actually the Windrush generation, the
yeah,
1950s and 60s Black presence in Britain.
yeah,
And whilst we have some accounts of the people who actually came in the late 40s and
yeah,
50s in particular.
yeah,
What we don't tend to have a lot is audio.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I've just sat there listening, thinking, "Wow, I wish I'd had that audio to play to the
Oh,
students."
it's
Because
brilliant. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's a great, yeah, it's a
yeah,
great
because
resource.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can't beat that primary
No,
resource.
no, you can't. No.
That's a rich
Yeah,
primary source.
yeah.
Even for
Because
10
each
minutes
time
of
I
that.
listen to it, I pick up something new.
Yeah,
There's a lot
yeah.
of
So
subtlety and nuance in it as well. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks
and
then, Tony. Well, we'll make sure you've got that ready for you when you're teaching that again.
yes,
And
yeah,
yeah,
and also you may be able to advise us on links because we did make an effort to link with Race Council Cymru, who are doing a heritage lottery research project on the Windrush generation in Wales. And because um, Levi's brother lives in Wales, we thought it might be appropriate, but I don't think they took that up, did they, Levi? So
no,
maybe we'll look at the group in London.
yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Chris, you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I leave.
Hi, how are you?
Fine,
Okay,
thank you.
All the
yeah.
Wolverhampton crew together here now.
Another Wolverhampton.
I'm not Wolverhampton originally. I'm from Birmingham.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm a Brummie. So, sorry, we've got building going on outside. But I was going
yeah,
to say, your father, your father's experience of aspiration and wanting
yeah,
more. I see that echoed in Birmingham of, I'm only first generation, probably like yourself, but I seen
yeah,
it amongst our relatives who had a good education
yeah.
and
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah, so I can actually resonate and
Yeah.
you know, and actually have a vision, because you're talking about the Birmingham area in that
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
how it was for your father.
Yeah.
And again, I would like to see or air the audio or
Yeah.
read a transcript, because I'm very interested. I thank you for
Yeah.
your speech.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Okay, well, I think that's fascinating. I was just going to ask, I wonder if your father, it's a difficult one, this, but your mother might know because she's still around, isn't she?
Yeah.
We often speak of a guy called Enrico Stennett, who came over the year before, and Jim Thakadordin knows Enrico's story very well. And he was helping people who first came and who came on the Windrush.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a name.
Yeah. So there's
He's
just a
now,
question about which church my father attended. Yeah.
oh yeah,
So, so I was just going to say, so I think when my father left Jamaica, he was a Baptist, and then I think sometime in the 50s he joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and in the interview he also talks about his experiences at the church, because I think initially when he first joined the church, it was a predominantly white, and he faced some prejudice there, in his own words, he would say, at the church, and it was a struggle to get the first black minister in the Adventist church. And it's interesting now because the whole of the Adventist church now, I think in England, is predominantly black, even the conference president as well. But he's talking about back in the late 1950s and 60s, in those days, what it was like at the church. So that sort of prejudice or discrimination he faced everywhere, even within the church. Although he also talked about having some, he said, I think he talks about the very first church he visited, which was a Baptist church, and that he received quite a warm, pleasant reception at that church. I'm not sure which one it was, but my father often uses the word mixed about his experiences. I guess referencing some experiences were good and some okay. So I think he's quite balanced in his judgment, probably a bit more than myself would be, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll carry on with this the theme, the Windrush theme, and what we're looking at. We'll make sure that we're sharing the transcript. Both.
Yeah.
Can we share the transcript and the audio?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And we'll take advice from others like Tony, about where we may be able to share that best. So that's good. Okay, so thank you very much indeed, Levi, and I look forward to talking with you some more again.
Yes,
It does make
indeed.
me feel at home. It's really good.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank
Okay,
you.
so lovely. So thank you, Caroline, for that question as well. That was really helpful. So if you want to ask any questions or make any comments or any time, or if you can't hear or whatever, just put it on the chat and we'll get and sort it out. Okay then. So Levi, you're welcome to hang on with us as long as you feel able to, but we understand if you need to get on your way. I know you've got something on early tomorrow morning. Okay, thanks ever so much. That's brilliant. So I'm now going to ask you, Tony Talbot, if Dr. Tony Talbot, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. When I wrote out to people to tell them about the session, I included a clip from LinkedIn, which is quite useful for finding out what people are about. But it'd be better if you can introduce yourself, please. I'd be very, very grateful. And then you can have as long as you like to tell us about your work, because it's so interesting. And then we can carry on with the conversation and ask questions. Thanks, Tony.
Right. Okay, well, first of all, thanks for inviting me, Liz. It's been a long time since we've connected. I was trying to remember, it's probably more than 10 years, if not longer.
That could be, yes.
Yeah. Strangely enough, I can relate to Chris in the sense that I was also born in a place called West Bromwich, England. So So not too far from another place, Wolverhampton and Birmingham, etc. And I live in Birmingham. My background is that I was like born in Jamaica, Jamaican parents, and then my parents went back to Jamaica in the 1970s. So all of us as kids went to Jamaica, and I lived in Jamaica for the next 15 years. So that's where I did finished my secondary education, college, teacher training, and my first degree was all in Jamaica, University of West Indies. And then I came back to England in 1988. So that would have been the year just before Levi went to Australia. And I guess I've always been interested in history and politics, in particular political history. So I actually, to cut a long story short, I lecture in African and Caribbean political history. And I'm a senior lecturer at the Birmingham City University in Black Studies. So that's what I do now. Before that, I was teaching for 7 years in Africa. I was a lecturer in African and International Studies at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. And before that, I worked as an education advisor for XL3. That's the organization that runs the National Black Boys Can Association. And I taught at a number of colleges, and I taught at Faircroft College in the 1990s. That was African Caribbean Studies. And I taught with the Open University for 10 years as well. I was an associate lecturer there. So my background is very much in kind of history and politics, international politics and development, particularly of Africa and the Caribbean. So my works, my papers, my books are all related to that area. So I think I sent, is it Simon? Is Simon the administrator of the
Yes,
site? Right, so I think I sent Simon just a blurb with the various books that I've written. So I know that Liz invited me on to talk about, I think it's the children's novel that I wrote. Is that right, Liz? Is that the one that you?
That is right, because I was so impressed by this. It's quite a slim volume because it's a book for children, but you wrote it quite a long time ago, before we were really talking about as much about embedding teaching Black history in the curriculum. And so really, Tony, it's my ignorance that was the that was the thing that really connected me with you. And obviously I was working with Steve Brooks and with the XL3 and the Black Boys Can, and now the college, the school in Birmingham. So that was where our link was. So yes, but I'm just interested in, particularly, you're welcome to tell us anything about your other experiences, because this is all about Black history, these conversations, as we take the opportunity to find out about all sorts of different strands, both shared history and African history and Caribbean history. But we're also looking at the stories of Black people in the UK, and your book was one of the earliest things that I knew about. And you were talking about the trumpeter in the court of King Henry, was it?
Yeah, King Henry the Seventh and the Eighth. Yeah.
John I
Blank.
apologise. Yeah. I haven't got your copy of the book here. It's safe in Wales. But it's one of the themes that we want to follow through. So although, and we're also, I'm interested in children's books, because if we're to help children understand about Black history, then we've got to acknowledge authors like yourself who've written books. And in Wales, we've got a colleague called Anne Carab Thomas, and she's written a book about the Penrhyn Castle story with links with the plantations in Jamaica as a fiction. But your book is a sort of a fiction. So tell us about it, will you?
Right, okay. Yeah, I mean, as I should also mention, as Levi was speaking, everything that he was saying resonated with one of the book, a little book that we did, which was a Black oral history project based in Warsaw. We actually interviewed 30 Black people who would come to Warsaw in the 1950s and 60s. And we simply got them to tell us their stories. And we published that, in fact, over 10 years ago, but we did a reprint in 2 years ago. And that's
Oh,
called,
right.
yeah, so that's what I've sent to Simon. So, I mean, Simon
Yeah.
can give you the details of that one as well. But it resonates so much with what Levi was saying about his own father's experience, because everything that Levi was saying, I could hear the voices talking to me when we interviewed those people in Warsaw, and that was almost 15 years ago. Yeah, when we first did that piece of research.
So
But to
was
come
that
back,
published? So what was it published in? Was that?
that book is called Through Sweat, Tears, and Triumphs. I can't even remember the full title of it. The Black Presence in Warsaw is by myself. It's Jenny Blake and Pat Housley and myself and Evadne, four of us. Because the four of us did the research, we did the interviews, and we published that book just 2-3 years ago. But I've sent Simon the details of it, because what it does, that book, it's the people who are telling us their accounts. And it resonates so much with what your father was saying, the experience in the churches, the experience in their one rooms, the pushings or shovings, as the Jamaicans call it, you know, all that rich experience. And we just let the people talk, and we just wrote what they said. And all we've done is just do slight editings of it. But that's a little book that we did a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds as if it's very useful. And I'll talk about books later, but
Sure, but for the children's one, what I wanted to do about 20 years ago, a few of us you might know Gilroy Brown.
Yes,
and Oscar Stewart, the late Oscar Stewart.
No, I didn't know Oscar.
Oscar, we were all into education, and we wanted to do a book for children, but it was to be a textbook. We never got around to it, and the three of us never really met again to even discuss that project. But because I'd been doing a lot of, I do a lot of sessions, training on Black history and all sorts. And one of the things that a number of parents have been asking for is a book for children, especially about Black British history. So, because almost as soon as you say Black history, we see Martin Luther King, we see Rosa Parks, we see Harriet Tubman, and so on. So it's very American. And we're talking 10 years ago. So what I decided to do was to write a book suitable for children, but not a textbook, because I thought a textbook might be too heavy, it might not be attractive. So I simply selected 7 different Black people who'd been involved, who lived and worked in Britain. And then I simply fictionalized it. I just told the story of 2 children who they go back in time and they just have an encounter with these 7 different individuals. So they travel all the way back, and then they meet Septimius Severus, who's the Roman emperor who ruled Britain in the 2nd century AD. So I know, so they have an adventure with him. That story ends. Then they meet the next character. They come back, you know, to the present time. Then they go back in time and they meet John Blank. Now, John Blank is the trumpeter who played for King Henry VII and King Henry VIII. And I mean, there's an intro. This is not in the book, but I mean, I was teaching this just a couple of months ago, and I was saying, you know, there's an account where John Blank is negotiating with Henry VIII and saying, look, I would like to play as one of your trumpeters in your court in place of another person who I think had passed away. And your predecessor, King Henry VII, used to pay me this amount. So he's almost negotiating with King Henry VIII, not only about replacing the trumpeter who had died previously, but about his wages. Now, when you think of, I mean, for you to be able to have that element of discussion with any kind of political leader is in itself fascinating. But this is a Black man having a discussion or having dialogue with King Henry VIII about negotiations about playing as part of the trumpeters at Westminster. So it's really is a very powerful account. We don't know much about John Blunt. We just have little sketches of just a few brief jottings about this guy who played for Henry VIII, and he played and also for Henry VII. And we know that his salary that he got as well, or his wages that he got for playing at that time. So that's the second story. Then the kids go back to their home, they come back to the present, then they go back again, and then they encounter Mary Prince, who was a slave in Bermuda, who comes to Britain. She ends up writing a book, 1831, which is the first woman to write a book about the attacking and the slavery in Britain. That's Mary Prince. So the two children in the story actually go back in time. They meet Mary Prince. They see her in London, and they get to see when she's escaping or whatever to go to meet up with Thomas Pringle of the Anti-Slavery Society, where she tells him his story, and they more or less write her biography, which is published. She also meets Mary Seacole, the nurse during the 1850s. And again, the kids have a dialogue with her on the battlefields. Now, of course, this is all totally fictitious. Can you imagine two kids, 10 and 11, on the outskirts of a battlefield, with Mary Seacole, who's helping soldiers and so on. But this is that, so that part of the book, it's all fiction. But Mary Seacole actually lived, just like Mary Prince, who actually lived. And then I tell the story of William Davidson. In the book, I call him Jamaica's Black Guy Fawkes. So he tried to do what Guido Fawkes did in 1605, which is to, he's dissatisfied with the political establishment. This is Guy Fawkes. So of course, he's trying to get rid of them, but he's obviously not going through an electoral process. Now, here we have, I'm putting that kind of mild and politely, but here we have a Black guy, William Davidson, in 1820 in London, who is part of a plot. So the plot is being planned by, his name just slips me now. It will come back, I hope. But there's about 5 or 6 people planning this plot. One of the guys is a Black man called William Davidson, and he's part of the plot to overthrow the government of England in 1820. It's called the Cato Street Conspiracy. So this is I think one historian describes it as one of the most daring assassination attempts in British history. So what they'd planned to do was to go to Grosvenor Road, central London, where the cabinet was supposed to be having a dinner, knock the door, knock out the doorman, this is all documented, and then storm the building, kill or shoot the other occupants of the house, and declare the revolution started. And then they were going to go to the Tower I think it was either the Bank of England or the Tower of London to declare that I think it was the Bank of England or somewhere to declare that the government had been toppled. Now, this is an extraordinary story, but what I do here, I take the kids back to the room in Cato Street where this plot is being planned. And of course, one of them falls off a chair. I think the little boy falls off a chair and the kids get captured. And so all of that is, someone said, well, that's total nonsense, but that's the story, that's the fiction. But behind the fiction is a real story of people plotting to take over the government in 1820. One of the ringleaders, but that they're eventually caught and they're hung, etc., including William Davidson, who's born in Jamaica, and he's a part of that campaign. So we might hear about Guy Fawkes, but I was just thinking that, do we ever hear about William Davidson of Jamaica, who was part of another plot to take over the government? So that's one story. And then I move forward, I come to Andrew Watson. He's a He's the world's first black football. I call it in my on my other book. I've actually got the book here, but it's Andrew Watson, the world's first black football superstar. Andrew Watson. Most books on kind of black footballers in Britain talk about Arthur Wharton
Toll. Oh.
and Andrew Toll, Walter
Mm.
Toll. But Walter Toll played for Spurs, and I'm a Spurs supporter for my sins. So it was Walter Toll that I was actually going to write about in the children's book. But when I realized that Andrew Watson had done so much more, I had to put my bias to one side and focus on Andrew Watson. So Walter Toll played for Spurs during World War I. Arthur Wharton was Britain's first black professional footballer that we know of. And he played in the 1890s and early 20th century. He was a goalkeeper, played for Preston North End and a number of other teams. But Andrew Watson, he played in the 1870s and the 1880s, just before football became a professional game. So he's not a professional footballer. Plus, his father was a slave owner. That's Andrew Watson's father, was a slave owner. And when he died, he left Andrew Watson and his sister the sum of £35,000, which is about £3 million plus in today's money. So Andrew Watson was part of an elite. This guy was very well educated. And to cut a long story short, he was part of the group of Scottish players, because he played for Scotland, who helped to modernize the game of football as we know it today. So football as we know it today, the English game, was really learned in Scotland. And Andrew Watson played for, oh goodness me, why has the team gone for my face? Before Rangers and Celtic, Queen's Park. He actually played for Queen's Park, and it was Queen's Park who pioneered this way of playing football, the passing game, rather than the English approach, which was similar to rugby, where the big, bulky, powerful forward would dribble with the ball and that kind of thing. Andrew Watson, born in Guyana, whose father was a slave owner, was part of this modernizing campaign. And he does something else which is remarkable. He captained the Scottish national football team in 1881. So here we have a black man who's so good that he captains the Scottish national football team. At this point, Scotland is the world's best team. Now, of course, there aren't many teams playing football, but Scotland was clearly miles ahead. They beat England 6-1 in 1881, and that is still England's heaviest ever defeat in a football match. The captain of the Scottish team, black guy, Andrew Watson. So the kids go back and they have an encounter with him, and then they come forward to the final story, which is Claudia Jones. Claudia Jones is, she's born in Trinidad and Tobago. She goes to America. She's a communist, a proper diehard communist, not even a socialist. And you'll see why I'm saying that in a minute. And she's a woman's rights activist. She's a black activist and a Marxist, all rolled into one. Is Claudia Jones. She's expelled from America because of her radical views. She comes to England and she sets up a carnival. And that carnival was held indoors in the town hall. I think it's Westminster. I could be wrong there. I'll have to check my notes again. But it's Claudia Jones who introduced the idea of the Notting Hill carnivals that we now celebrate in the UK.
Oh.
They came out of Claudia Jones' inspiration. And what she wanted to do was to simply, because of the riots taking place in England, again, it goes back to what Levi was saying, you know, black and white people fighting, race riots. Claudia Jones said, I'm going to hold an event to showcase what Caribbean people and culture is like, or alike. So she held that first meeting inside a building. It wasn't an outdoor event at all. And there was music, there was food, etc. So people would sit down and then there would be people on a stage performing. That was the first carnival. When by the 1960s, after Claudia Jones's death, Then we get the outdoor thing, because Carnival in the Caribbean is an outdoor thing, just like in Brazil. It's all outdoors. It's a street parade, but then the weather, the climate allows that. But here in England, the very first one was done indoors. So basically this story, that book, is designed to introduce children to Black history, but from a British perspective, and in a way that is not too, because it's children, you could almost meet the individuals and not even realize that they're Black. I mean, in the book, for example, when the kids see the Roman soldiers marching through the streets of York, then they see this, they're describing the soldiers. I think I've got a few sentences there. And I think when the boy, Omar, who's 10, the 10-year-old boy in the story, he says, but look, but that guy looks like a Black guy. And I kind of make that mention in the book, because the children themselves don't know what, they're astonished as anyone else to see what they're seeing. So it's like the children are learning history through the eyes of these two children. So that's the aim of the book. It's very simply very simply written, because I'm aiming it at sort of 8-9-year-olds and early teens. But a number of adults have read it and have found it quite interesting, because it's kind of simple, it's direct. And I keep saying I must really get onto book 2, but time just keeps running away from me. But that's the essence of that book. I hope you got the gist of it. I'm trying to give you an overview of what the book was like, but that's the essence of the book.
Well, that's just fantastic. And I'm sure that everybody who's just listened to you summarizing the characters in the book, the two children, and then the characters, the real characters, the children are fictitious, but the characters are real, can understand why I was so impressed. So I probably read this, it would have been about 10 years ago, you reckon, Tony, you wrote it?
Yeah, it's 2012. That's right. Yeah, when I published that one. Yeah.
So it's a good long time ago, and I was just riveted because I didn't know hardly any of those stories. I'd heard of Mary Seacole, but I honestly hadn't heard of any of the other stories. And so it really made me think, well, if I don't know this and I can learn all this from in such an entertaining way. And one of the things we've been talking about is about historical fiction and historical fact and the way we're writing books, because there is a big need to have more books that we can for children and for adults. But I mean, I could remember now. It's one of those books that you just sat down and read the whole book. It was so interesting, and I didn't know that there'd been a Roman emperor who was in York, and he actually died and was buried in York. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
17,
yeah,
he was an African. He was
yeah. I had
born
no idea.
born in Libya,
So,
as we now know it. Yeah, North
yeah.
Africa. Yeah.
So fantastic. So since then, I've taken a real interest in exploring stories of African people, Caribbean people who've lived in England, Wales, and maybe Scotland. But I'm sure there are others who want to say things, because we have Jim Zakordin, who is Guyanese background, and I don't know if he knows anything about Andrew Watson and his slave-owning father and the story there, and also David Alston. His research in the Highlands and slavery is about
I think,
the link with Suriname and Guyana.
I've just realised, as during our discussion, that Tony and I were in touch. I think about 10 years ago. I think.
Yeah, I think yes. When I saw the name, I'm thinking, but I should know this. This name sounds familiar. So then when I saw you, obviously we've not met visibly. So I thought, well, maybe it must be another David Alston. But I'm sure I know of a David Alston, because when I was writing the book on Andrew Watson, you sent me a couple of files on Scottish.
My particular interest is in Guyana, and I have a particular interest in the children of Highland Scots
Right. Okay.
and
Okay.
enslaved women or free women of color in Guyana. Andrew Watson's, and since we were in touch, I mean, I've done a lot of investigating of that family.
Yeah.
Andrew Watson's grandmother came from about 10 miles away from where I am in Cromarty in the north of Scotland. And his father was born in Orkney, and they are, I mean, as you were saying, they're not just they're slave owners, but they're also the super rich of the slave owners by the time of emancipation. The company that they're part of has become Sandbach Tine by that point, and they receive enormous amounts of compensation at emancipation. But interestingly, I've also got interested in the last year in William Davidson. I didn't realize that you'd written about him. And I think I've managed to trace his roots back to a family in Aberdeenshire. So, so it's really been fascinating, and I must get hold of your children's book. I didn't know about it. Great to meet you.
Okay. Yes. Well, fine. Yes, it's nice to meet you. Right.
Oh, that's great. So, Jim, I don't know, was this news to you? Had you heard of Andrew Watson before?
No, I never heard of Watson. Oh, it was very interesting. Tony's work, I'd like to see, like David, I'd like to see a copy of that book. But the thing is, I wrote my first book in 1984 when I was a national trade union officer. And all that was my swan song. It was to do with racism within trade unions. And it could have been equally sexism within trade unions because all the leaders were men and they were white Asian men. And that was a network. In fact, the unions operated against Black people and against women getting equal pay and equal opportunities. And so I was part of that struggle. And then I found my way out after a major trade union leader at the time said to me, Jim, you've got no future in this trade union movement as long as you have a hole in your backside. And so I said, David, there's your key. I'm going to empty my cupboard and I'm going home to find another job. And of course, trade unions paid their employees very well. The male employees doing negotiating work extremely well. But the women in the back room, typists and admin, were getting a fraction of what the officers were getting. And so that's interesting. But the point I wanted to make is that as Black people, few of us read books. We read the books we've written ourselves. And for me, as an author of over a dozen books, I have difficulty passing my books on or selling my books to fellow Black people who are interested in history but wouldn't buy a book. You go to their homes and there may be the Bible, there will be the Bible and a few other books, but not books in politics, because like the guy talked earlier about his dad, didn't want to explain much of his background and experience in Britain because it was too political. We were fighting racism, but a lot of people didn't want to talk about it, about their history or their experience. And there's plenty has been written. In those days, we didn't have camera. You may have a little brownie camera taking black and white pictures, but we never had the mobile phone and taking pictures and organizing that way. We print our leaflets in a Ronio printer. We type it and then on the rolling machine print it out. Very poor quality. You can hardly read it. But my daughter, who lives in Birmingham and works for the university, and so I'm going to ask her to check our friend out. I've forgotten his,
You do that.
I've forgotten his name now because he's gone off the screen.
No, Tony's moved, but he's still on the screen.
He's back.
I'm still here. Yeah, I'm still here.
I'm going to ask my daughter to check you out.
All right.
She works at university, and she's the head managing a group that deal with students and staff mental health issues. Her name is Jane Fecorden. And
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
She's done some writing, but I'll ask her to catch up with you. But we need that book. I've written a book and I talked about it last time. I didn't get a single orders from this network or from any other network. So during the whole month of November, December, when I sell my books, normally I sold none at all. I gave 6, 7 away as Christmas presents. But
Right.
we're going to start
So
reading each other's book and persuade Black people to read their history. It's a big job. But I find most the people, 90%, 95% people who bought my book are white folks who are already committed to anti-racism. And it's the people that don't show an interest, get involved, has a lot to say about it, that we need to persuade. That storming of the American Congress Senate the other day, there were Black people amongst those people, amongst that crowd. There were Black people amongst them. And these were white, racist, fascists, terrorists storming the American democracy. And there was Black people joining them. But there was good Black people in Georgia, the Black woman who registered 1.8 Black people to vote. So we have a struggle amongst ourselves, Tony, to look at how we portray racism and Black history. And I'm very pleased the way you have done it, in the way you have done it in a story for young people. That's excellent. And Kelly, I'd like to work with you. I'd like to support your work. I'd like to read your work first, and then I'll find ways in which I can publicize your book, get people to buy it. It seems a very good book. Liz is the only one who read it. But that's the kind of literature, using different ways, using literature, using politics, using trade unions, using other sources to get our books across. But sadly, we've got a big job to educate fellow Black people that life is more than making money or joining the middle class. But as working class people, we have a tremendous history that we can feel proud of. Thank you.
thank you very much indeed, Jim. That's so valuable. And Jim, one of the things that I want to discuss, and I've been discussing with Professor Satie and others, is, and especially with Leslie Evans, is that we started a Black History book club, but we decided reading one book a month was going to take us far too long to get anywhere, and we didn't really get it off the ground before Christmas. And now we're thinking of doing other things to bring authors together. And we've got several of you I can see on the screen who are authors, or at least will have written articles. And it's about where people find information about Black history. And yes, you can search at random on Google, but if we can guide people to books that you can read on particular themes about Black history, because it's such a huge subject. And Tony, I think, as you said, Black history originally, Black History Month, was an American idea, so it there's been a tendency for it to go to those Black history stories, and yet we're finding there are so many more. And your description of the book was just absolutely brilliant, and thank you so much for that.
Can I make another point? Just a brief point. I'll be very brief. I think lots of people can approach Black history if they read other history as well. For example, as an equality consultant for many years, I never gone straight in and talk about Black struggle and racism. I talk, if there's a lot of women in the audience, I will talk about sexism. Young people in the audience, I'll talk about discrimination against young people or older people or LGBTQ people. Because once you come out with race, it seems you're hitting people straight in the face. And so I encourage people to read all history, not only Black history, but the suffering of the Irish people, the Scots people, the English people, the Welsh people. And once we can build this affinity with other people who know that not only were Black people slaves, but English people were slaves, and slavery was popular and quite acceptable in this country until 1828. In the 12th, 14th, 13th century, you had slave markets in Britain, and English people were bought and sold. Scottish, Irish people were sold as indentured laborers under the pretense to America, but they were really slaves. but they were called indentured laborers, or going to America and other parts of the world to do housework. Irish children sent to Australia and exploited. So this late thing, although we're talking about Black history, we've got to share other people's history that will come and join us in the struggle and be part of that struggle. Final point is the book I wrote about Enrico. I have it on a link. I'm no good with IT, but a friend did it on a link. I'm happy to share that book to other people on a link, as indeed shared a book about my own life story. I think I've shared that. But nobody's going to say, Jim, your book is interesting from what I've seen from the link. I've got a link of one of the most important books I've read in my whole life on race. And that's book I helped Enrico Stennett to write. It's called Bakra Masa Pickney, a Jamaican of mixed race with Scottish grandparent background. He came with the Windrush as a 17-year-old, the same age when I arrived. Well, I arrived at 16 in Britain. And so there's tons there, but I've offered it, but nobody said, can I read it? So in a sense, I've always been trying to be honest. A lot of white people here, a lot of people interested in Black history. Yeah, my wife just told me lunch is ready. Thank you, darling.
All right then. Well, I'm going to say to you, Jim, you've really inspired me, and this idea that we've got of having a central point, and we had a meeting last Saturday, and we were discussing it then. So I think it will be something that we will really follow up. And Jim, please send me the links again, please. And Tony, would you mind sending me the link for your books as well, please?
Yeah, I've already.
Simon says he can't manage to find it. And
the
on
email.
the side, yeah. Can you send it to me, and then
All right, I'll send it after.
He says he's got some problems. Yes, it's not a hurry. Okay, so that's really good. Now with
Liz, I've just checked. The book is available. Tony's book is available on Amazon. I'll post the link. I found it there.
Fine. And unfortunately, Levi's gone now, but I was just going to mention that Helen, you've put a message here. Interesting, because you're a writer and illustrator of Ethiopian children's literature, and Levi had actually worked in Ethiopia for a while, but we'll follow that one up again. Okay then, so various people want to ask questions. Chris, or make points, Chris?
Hi, Tony. Very interesting and well illustrated book by the sounds of it. These asked a couple of questions of people if they knew about this or if they knew about that. I knew about the emperor and the trumpeter and Mary Seacole, who we last year tried to do Mary Seacole Day and everything like that. But my point being is the history, what you add at that time, what you put out at that time for publication, it's like gold dust in this time because it's so relevant.
Yeah.
Politically, it was a different time then. Now, Black history is more relevant than ever. The sort of history that you was talking about and the reasons why, I think a lot of it is to do with the Renaissance and the covering up of history and events and of service and of deeds. So actually, when you talk about the kings of England, and you found it strange that that conversation should be had with King Edward or whoever. Henry, sorry. Well, the kings of Europe at that time as well, just from the 700s going up, right? Yeah, they did rule Europe, and a lot of things have been whitewashed through the Renaissance. Through your stories, I think we recapture them right back from Roman times, you know, and the way you went back in time with your characters. It's been done before, but it's just beautifully done by yourself. And I would like to get that book as well and use that book within the new curriculum what we're having in Wales, because it seems like it's a very comprehensive, easy way to describe events within Black history where we contributed to. My only last point is that Dr. Jim, he made reference about people not taking up book offers and things like that, and not supporting our own. But the time has changed. I think there's a lot of support for Black history. Furthermore to that, shared world history, because it's all of our history. Make reference about Ireland and their struggles. Well, I can go 10,000 years before and talk about the Twa people of Ireland, who were Pygmies and who actually were the first settlers in Ireland, the Twa people. You can look it up yourself. And they were Black, you know, the first Pygmies, and they're called leprechauns at that time, doing magic, working with Neko, you know. So there's a lot of history, and maybe you can say about shared world history, and if people's going to accept it, the mechanism now for the younger generation at least is this media. And I think a lot of what you say about whatever book anybody's describing, you show such a visual effect that because we've got Zoom, because we've got whatever other social medias, I think a lot of the books should be more put onto our platforms where in a discussion where you're discussing it and you're illustrating it verbally. But I'm not going to go on about that anyway, but it was brilliant, brilliant. And Tony, you describe some of the other subjects where your expertise lies as well, more than children's books. I would have liked to have heard of something more what else you do, but maybe next time. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. And Tony, I think that's probably a really good idea. I don't think it's right to ask you now to tell us about the many other things that you've done. But it would be really great if you were willing to join us perhaps on another occasion. Would that be possible?
Yeah, possibly. Today's Friday? Yeah.
Not in the immediate future, but perhaps in a few weeks' time. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that might be okay. I mean, I was as Chris was talking, I was just thinking that he's made a valid point that in terms of books, sometimes, especially if the age we now live in with young people, they might be more into books that talk to them, speaking books and things online rather than doing. I still love. I mean, up to last week, I bought a book. You know, I'm still buying books because I'm of that age where I prefer to turn the page like this rather than to look on the screen. But I have got. If you go on YouTube, I give a talk. There's I think it's not actually it's a TV show where I'm talking about 2 or 3 of the books, and one and the children's book is mentioned there. And I also give on YouTube. I've done a presentation on Andrew Watson as well, where I go in a bit more detail. It's about 12 minutes where I talk about why I think this guy. I think he's far more significant than Walter Tull and Andrew Watson and Arthur Wharton combined. This guy is mega, but it's just that we don't know much about him, which is so sad. This year, March, would be 100 years since he died, buried in London. Yeah, but he did so much.
Perhaps we can make something special of that, because you've written, haven't you, about you've written a book about Andrew Watson.
I've got a specific book on Andrew Watson. But what I'm saying, and there is a group of us actually planning. We were planning to redo his grave.
Oh, right, good.
And do a headstone and so on, because he's just completely forgotten. but he did so much for football. My book was only about football. So he was he was absolutely mega at this point. So
fabulous.
yeah,
Well, can you let us have the link with your YouTube talk, because that would be very, very helpful. And then maybe when it's the 100th anniversary in March, then maybe you can talk to us again and tell us what you're doing in recognition of the anniversary, and that would be really good, if that's okay. Anyway, we'll see. We'll talk about that. So Tony, thank you so much. That's been absolutely brilliant, and inspirational in a number of ways, and particularly as an author. That's one of the things that we're really interested to see what we can bring out of this. Now, there's an author from North Wales called Miranda Kaufman, and she's written a book on the Black Tudors. I don't know
that's
if
right.
you know
Yeah,
that
yeah,
one.
yeah.
And
It's on
so
our reading list. Yeah.
Yeah, she's on our list to get in and speak as well. And Simon, I was wondering, next week I'd suggested in our planning that you and the team from Belong might like to talk about the story of George Africanus, the research you did there.
Yeah, I think we can do that. Tie in nicely with me relocating the George Africanus websites back onto the Belong pages. So
right, okay. Yep. Well, that would be really good, because that's an interesting story. George Africanus was one of those young Black people who were brought over by maybe ship's captains or whatever, and he was I'm not sure, but we'll hear about it next week. But he ended up with the Molyneux family in Wolverhampton. So there's a story in Wolverhampton about this. And there's a story in Nottingham, where he then went as an adult to live. So next week I'm going to
a bit of businessman and an unusually for his time, somebody who could vote.
Yes, so that'll be fascinating. So what we're going to try and do, though, is to follow through all these different threads and see how we can move forward. But the thing about the books, and it's great on the comments page. Simon, you're saying maybe we can build an online list and repository. Well, yes, that's sort of the idea that we've got. And to engage different authors and encourage others to write more. So also Jim's saying that Professor Satie, that he's waiting to know how we can send some books to you, because that's one of the pledges that we made. So Professor Satie, perhaps we can discuss that on email or suggestions now. But over to you, Professor Satie, for 2 or 3 minutes to tell us whatever you want to tell us today.
Yeah, I have nothing very really new to say, but to thank Tony for his wonderful presentation that looks like the archaeology of history, for trying to dig out those who did wonderful things in the past and bringing them to the fore. Singing the unsung heroes and heroines is part of historical knowledge, and it is deeply appreciated. I just have one little concern that is personal to me about Black History Month, for example, or Black history. Conceptually, when you talk of Black history back in Africa, it's looked like some kind of racialization. But in Africa, we would prefer to talk about African history. But because you are in jurisdictions that, or you are in areas where those terminologies matter, they sell, but they will hardly fly here in Africa, south of Sahara. When you say you want to do Black history, people will hardly understand what you're talking about. But when you say you want to do African history, it's understood. So that's just what I wanted to clarify. But I think I understand the conversations, but then for it to be extended Africa-wide, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, I, for example, cannot convene a group and I say we want to talk about Black history. They wouldn't understand it.
No. I think that's a really good. I think it's a really good point that you're making. And I think there's different ways of talking, because to talk about our shared history is also another way. And work that we're doing, Learning Links International, is about shared history with Jamaica and shared history between North Wales and stories there and stories in North Clarendon. And we've discovered some really interesting stuff about the post-emancipation time and the union work. You'll be interested in this, Jim, if you haven't gone off to lunch. The union links, and we've been able to find quite a lot of information about union activists in the Caribbean, and the work that they were able to do to improve conditions for workers there. So there's shared histories, there's Black history when you're talking about like the American situation, but each each country needs to look at their historical links in their own way, really. But yes, we need to take that up. So thanks very much for that, Professor Satie. Now, the only other person who I was hoping was going to just tell us a little bit, if you can just have 5 minutes. Are you still there, Lisa? Lisa?
Yes. Yes, I am still here.
All right. I've no idea what time it is. What time is it in Texas?
It is 7:30 in the morning. So
well,
I'm actually in
to get up so early.
I'm in my grandbaby room, so it looks very baby oriented. This was the quietest place in the house. So
this is all right.
My grandchildren come to. Well, I am so privileged just to listen in. I am absolutely in awe of the work and the passion that everyone has. So as Liz mentioned, my interest is that I'm researching the role of wool as a commodity that sustained empire building. And so I am looking at micro histories and the way that it these threads, if you will, pardon the pun, connect different places around the world. And so I'm looking through the lens of wool to see how so many different places are linked together through this commodity. And so I'm looking at Welsh wool and the Welsh Plains specifically, and how that takes us to Jamaica, and you have the connection to people who are producing in Wales with those who are wearing the wool in other places. And this commodity becomes important in all of the American colonies. And so this thread takes us to the North American colonies, and through that, the control of wool with the Wool Act and how important wool is as people use wool so importantly as we develop and establish independence in America, how it is used as a commodity for enslaved persons in so many different places as well, and at the same time provides agency and opportunity for independence. So it's controlled, and yet it is a tool for independence, and how the wool also is used in establishing Australia, and then becomes a commodity that provides opportunity for those who establish themselves in Australia eventually. So I'm definitely just hitting the highlights. But this commodity and its presence throughout empire, and how it was such an important commodity throughout history, but was this surviving, very foundational force that it was kind of underrepresented historiographically because it wasn't a moneymaker always. So it does, my lens takes us to the individuals who, through their quiet devotion to survival is held together through wool. So it's an interesting commodity to be able to pull together the histories of so many people who are not going to make it into a history book because they were not the movers and shakers, if you will, but those who just sustained themselves and survived regardless of their situation. So it does look at individuals in a way that they've been underrepresented through this underrepresented commodity, and which blends in so incredibly with Black history because it's everyone's history and it's everywhere, and it's more than just Black history, it's the history of individuals. And I think this is such a great time historiographically. As a historian, we're not in a time where we're just looking for the big moments, but we're looking for the individuals. Who are those people? Who were the spinners and the shipbuilders, or the enslaved persons, or the women who were sent to colonize, who would have otherwise been destined for the gallows. So I'm interested in the individuals and the people and the agency that they're able to glean through wool. So that's what brings me to the table. It's very interesting to be in America and listen to the perspective from outside of America. And as one person mentioned, there are so many Black figures who are used as a standard lens to look at Black history. And yet, even though there are so many American names of recognition, we have so far to go in America to do justice to the individual Black history. And I marveled at the advancement and the honesty that was taking place when I attended a conference and met Liz in Wales. I thought, I wish we could have this kind of transparency in America to say, this is our history, and there are parts of it that are ugly, and there are parts of it that need to be recognized. And I felt like there was such an honesty that was taking place outside of America that I wish I could bring back here and carry that forward. So hopefully together we can all create a voice for those who are not heard as of yet. It's a very interesting time. Someone else mentioned something that it would be so wonderful if there were more people that were reading, more Black people who could make a difference, that were reading the Black history. And that's something that kind of resonated when I was looking into New Zealand's Maori. And there's an effort right now to have Maori write more of their own history, as opposed to having historians who are not Maori document that history. And so I don't know how you foster that interest and enthusiasm, but I think certainly honest discussions and riveting information, and definitely that children's book, I'll be on Amazon to get that as well, because what a great place to start with ripe, open minds who are ready to be fed and kind of change the course of history. Because what we do read is the bigger picture. And let's just take one example. If you're talking about an explorer, you've heard their names, but who are the shipbuilders? Who are the people that grew the food to feed the people aboard that ship? There's a great book by Judith Carney called Black Rice, and I really love that book because it gives agency to the understanding that in America, we've talked about the establishment of colonies and how important the commodity of rice was, but we never fully acknowledged that that wasn't possible without the brilliance of people who did not have the choice to be transported, but brought with them a knowledge that was unequivocal to anything that was in the Americas, and certainly didn't come from Europeans. That knowledge of rice cultivation only came through those who were transported. So that kind of agency is new and exciting to shine a light on. And so it's an exciting time to be a researcher or historian. And we have the privilege now of kind of cracking open and pulling back the curtains on untold histories. And I'm excited about it.
Well, thank you so much. That was just really, really interesting. I mean, your work's just fantastic, and we need to invite you on a Saturday. We do one Saturday a month where we look at continuing our Breath In project, and perhaps you'll come and talk to us there. But also, we're trying to plan ahead. Season 1, the first 12 sessions, October to December, we sort of went from week to week, but we're now trying to plan ahead. Because we've got interesting themes, and we're going to do a session hopefully towards the end of February, and we're looking at textiles. Simon's got lots of links with cotton, and it would be great, Lisa, if you could come and speak with us again then. It would be really good. So we'll see how we work through this program. So Simon, if you want to stop the recording now, and then we can just catch up on a couple of other things before everybody goes. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Thank you very much indeed, Tony, for your presentation. That was just brilliant. Thank you so